Marcus Reed had reached that specific level of exhaustion where the universe felt like it was personally trolling him.
The path
The
ahead is
cargo bay
fraught with
lights
peril.
buzzed
We
too
must
bright.
proceed with
The
caution or
artificial
face the
gravity sat just a
consequences.
fraction heavier than regulation, and the supply crates seemed to multiply every time he blinked. His exo assist gloves whined softly as he guided another container into its designated slot, the station's AI chirping helpful reminders about optimal lifting posture that Marcus ignored on principle. 14 hours into a 16-hour shift. Fueled by recycled coffee that tasted like liquid regret in a protein bar he'd eaten 6 hours ago that still hadn't decided whether to stay down or stage a rebellion. This was his life now. Former Lieutenant Marcus Reed, United States Navy Supply Corps, reduced to playing Tetris with cargo containers on a commercial space station orbiting Mars. He'd had bigger plans once, everyone did. The year was 2187, and Liberty Station hung in the void like a steel flower, its rotating habitation rings catching the distant sunlight as Mars turned below. 50,000 souls called this place home, or at least a temporary stopping point. Military personnel on rotation, corporate executives chasing the next big contract, families hoping to stake claims on the new frontier, and cargo handlers like Marcus, the invisible infrastructure that kept the whole operation running. Marcus pulled up the manifest on his wrist display, squinting at the tiny text. His eyes felt like someone had replaced them with sandpaper. Container 7743 Delta, classification, agricultural equipment. Destination, hydroponics base 7. Priority, low. Translation, it would sit here for another 3 days because nobody gave a damn about spare parts for lettuce farms when there were military supplies and luxury goods competing for transport space. He'd seen this pattern 1,000 times. Hell, he'd been part of the system that created these patterns. Back when he wore the uniform, back when people called him sir, back when he thought the Navy actually cared about efficiency over ego. That was before he'd made the mistake of being honest. The overhead speakers crackled to life, breaking his concentration. Attention Liberty Station personnel. We are honored to host diplomatic representatives from the Stellar Alliance today. Please extend appropriate courtesy and maintain standard protocols in all public areas. That is all. Marcus snorted. Diplomatic representatives. That was code for royalty is slumming with the common folk. Try not to embarrass the species. He'd dealt with enough brass in his Navy days to know how these things worked. A bunch of people in expensive clothes would tour the nice parts of the station, shake some hands for the cameras, make some empty promises about cooperation and shared futures, then disappear back to wherever people with power disappeared to when they were done pretending to care. He didn't bother looking up. Didn't matter to him. His world existed in this cargo bay, in the endless cycle of receive, log, store, retrieve, ship. The same dance, different day, different solar system, same bullshit. Container 7743 Delta slotted into place with a satisfying magnetic clunk. Marcus marked it complete on his manifest and moved on. Container 7744 Echo, Container 7745 Foxtrot, the alphabet of his diminished ambitions. His mind wandered as his body went through the motions. Muscle memory from 1,000 identical shifts. He thought about the apartment waiting for him, a glorified closet in the station's lower rings where the gravity was weakest and the rent was almost affordable. Thought about the legal bills still arriving monthly, digital reminders that honesty came with a price tag. Thought about the 37 job applications he'd sent to other stations, other corporations, other branches of the military. 37 polite rejections, or worse, silence. Nobody wanted to hire the guy who'd blown the whistle on his commanding officer for embezzling relief supplies. Didn't matter that Marcus had been right. Didn't matter that Commander Ashford was doing 20 years in a federal facility on Earth. What mattered was that Marcus had broken the unspoken rule. You don't air dirty laundry. You don't make waves. You certainly don't go over your superior's head and file formal charges backed by 3 months of secretly compiled evidence. The Navy had thanked him for his service, accepted his voluntary resignation, and made sure every potential employer in the solar system knew exactly what kind of employee Marcus Reed was, the troublemaking kind, the troublemaking. So here he was, 28 years old, a decorated logistics officer with commendations for efficiency and innovation, moving boxes in a warehouse. His father would have been proud or disappointed, probably both. Marcus shook his head, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion and self-pity. Container 7746 Golf, medical supplies, priority, medium. At least this one mattered. Somebody's hospital was waiting for these. He handled it with more care, checking the temperature seals, verifying the containment integrity. Old habits died hard. Even if nobody else gave a damn about doing the job right, Marcus did. Maybe that was his problem. Maybe if he'd learned to care less, he'd have ended up happier. But he'd never been good at lying, especially to himself. The cargo bay stretched out around him like a mechanical cathedral, 20 meters high, 100 meters deep, lined with storage racks that climbed toward the distant ceiling. Somewhere in the upper levels, the environmental systems hummed their eternal song. The air smelled like metal and lubricant, and the peculiar, sterile emptiness of recycled atmosphere. Marcus had learned to love this space, in his way. It was honest. Crates didn't play politics. Cargo didn't care about your rank or your past. It just existed, waiting to be moved from point A to point B. Simple. Clean. Unlike everything else in his life. He was lining up container 7747 hotel when he heard the footsteps. Light, measured, the kind of stride that suggested someone who knew where they were going. Not unusual. The cargo bay connected to 3 major corridors. People cut through here all the time, taking shortcuts between the commercial district and the residential rings. Marcus didn't look up, didn't care. His focus remained on the manifest display, on the endless list of tasks stretching into the next 2 hours. 2 more hours, then he could clock out, drag himself home, collapse on his bunk for 6 hours before starting the whole cycle again. The footsteps passed behind him, close enough that Marcus registered a presence in his peripheral vision. Someone in dark workout gear, moving with that easy athletic grace that suggested either military training or expensive personal trainers. Probably both. Station gym memberships cost more than Marcus made in a week, but apparently diplomats needed to maintain their figures. And that's when his mouth, operating independently of his exhausted brain, decided to share an observation with the universe. Nice ass. The words drifted out into the cavernous space, light and careless and entirely disposable. Just noise. Just the kind of thing you muttered when you'd been awake too long and your filter had gone off duty 3 hours ago. Marcus expected nothing, maybe a scoff, maybe nothing at all. People in workout gear heard that kind of thing constantly. Probably. It would just dissolve into the background noise of station life, forgotten as soon as it was spoken. Instead, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that pressed inward, as if the station itself had leaned closer to listen. Marcus's thumbs hovered over the manifest display, a cold awareness suddenly flooding his nervous system. That particular quality of silence. He'd heard it before, in briefing rooms right before someone's career ended, in courtrooms before verdicts were read, the silence of consequences arriving. He looked up. The woman had turned around. She stood maybe 10 meters away, backlit by the corridor lights, and Marcus's exhausted brain needed several long seconds to process what his eyes were showing him. She was dressed in fitted station workout gear, practical and unadorned, the kind worn by people who actually use gyms instead of treating them as social venues. Her skin was fair, almost luminous under the harsh bay lighting. Blonde hair pulled back in a functional ponytail, loose strands framing a face that possessed the kind of composed beauty you saw on recruitment posters. Classic features, high cheekbones, eyes that were currently studying Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. And then there were the ears. They rose through her hair, elegant and tapered, longer than human standard, with that distinctive Alteran curve. Uncovered, unashamed, each ear adorned with small silver bands that caught the light when she tilted her head. Marcus's stomach dropped through the deck plating. "Oh," he said, with all the eloquence of a man watching his life flash before his eyes. Oh no, because he'd seen that face before. Everyone had, on news feeds, on diplomatic announcements, on the station's official welcome screens. Queen Alara Voss of the Stellar Alliance, Our sovereign of 14 integrated systems, architect of the Treaty of Proxima, Time Magazine's Person of the Year 3 cycles running, standing in his cargo bay in workout clothes, having just been informed by an exhausted cargo handler that she possessed, and Marcus quoted himself here with mounting horror, a nice ass. His military training, which had carried him through combat drops and supply convoys through hostile territory, completely abandoned him. His mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Somewhere in his brain, protocols were screaming at him. Stand at attention, salute, apologize. Do something other than stand here looking like an idiot. Your Majesty, Marcus finally managed, straightening so fast his exo gloves squealed in protest. I am so profoundly sorry. That was extremely inappropriate. I didn't know. He was making it worse. Each word dug the hole deeper. His face felt hot enough to melt steel. Alara Voss stepped closer. The distance between them collapsed to maybe 5 meters, then less. Marcus became acutely aware of the oil smudge on his work coveralls, the smell of recycled sweat and cargo bay coolant that probably clung to him, the fact that his hair hadn't seen a proper shower in 20 hours. He was very much not prepared for a historic moment of personal humiliation. Say it again, Say it again, she said. The words were quiet, calm, curious, like she was asking him to repeat a dinner order or clarify a schedule. Marcus stared at her, certain he had finally snapped. Exhaustion-induced hallucination, protein bar poisoning, something. Because surely a queen did not just ask him to repeat the incredibly inappropriate comment he'd made about her. I'm sorry, he said, which at least was vaguely appropriate for the situation even if it was phrased as a question. Alara's ears tilted slightly forward. The movement was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but Marcus had done enough cross-cultural training in the Navy to know that Alteran ear positions conveyed emotion the way human facial expressions did. Forward meant interest, attention, focus. Her expression wasn't angry, it wasn't amused either. It was intent, concentrated in a way that made Marcus feel like he'd accidentally pressed a button he didn't know existed. What you said, she continued, taking another step closer. Repeat it. Marcus laughed. The sound came out wrong, high and panicked. That seems medically unwise, Your Majesty. I am not offended, Alara said, and there was something in her voice now, something Marcus's exhausted brain couldn't quite categorize. If I were, this conversation would be happening with security present, and you would already be restrained. Does that provide adequate reassurance? That's, Marcus searched for words, moderately comforting? She regarded him for a moment longer, and then, to Marcus's complete astonishment, she smiled. Not the practiced diplomatic curve he'd seen on countless news feeds, the one that looked carved from marble and twice as warm. This was something smaller, more real, as if it had been sitting unused for a long time and wasn't quite sure how to emerge into the light. 15 years, she said, as if continuing a thought Marcus hadn't been privy to hearing. That is how long I have been queen. Marcus stood very still, uncertain if he was supposed to respond or if this was some kind of test. The kind of test where every answer was wrong and the best move was silence. Alara stepped into the loading zone proper, the overhead lights casting clean shadows across her face and catching on the delicate bands adorning her ears. In that time, she continued, every word spoken to me has been measured, filtered. Do you understand what I mean? Marcus hesitated. I suppose people are careful around authority figures? Careful, Alara repeated, tasting the word. Yes, careful. No one speaks freely to me. No one forgets what I am, not even for a moment. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every casual remark carries calculation. Even compliments arrive with ulterior motives attached. She stopped a few feet from him now, close enough that Marcus could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, earned rather than painted on. Close enough to see the rise and fall of her breathing. Close enough that his hyperactive threat assessment protocols were screaming at him to back up, maintain proper distance, show deference. He didn't move. Your comment was crude, Alara said. Her ears angled back slightly, and Marcus was pretty sure that meant thoughtfulness or consideration. Poorly timed, socially disastrous. Marcus nodded vigorously. I am exceptionally good at those things. And yet, she said, and now that small smile returned, it was honest. The cargo bay felt smaller suddenly. Or maybe Marcus's world was just rearranging itself around this conversation, trying to find stable ground. No one speaks to me without knowing who I am, Alara continued. No one forgets, not even for a second. You did. You looked at me and saw. She paused, searching for words. Not a queen, not an alliance, not a political entity to be managed. You saw a person in workout clothes and made an observation that, while inappropriate, was entirely unfiltered. Marcus swallowed hard. Your Majesty, I assure you, if I'd had any idea. You would have remained silent, she finished for him. You would have stood at attention, averted your eyes, said something appropriate and meaningless. Yes, I know. Her ears angled forward again, that intense focus returning. That is precisely the point. For one moment, I was simply someone walking through a cargo bay. Do you have any idea how rare that is for me? Marcus thought about his own experience, about wearing a uniform, carrying rank, watching people's faces change when they saw the bars on his collar, about how everyone suddenly had something they needed, some favor to ask, some complaint to file, about how genuine conversation became impossible once people knew what you were instead of who you were. I can imagine, he said quietly. So, Alara said, folding her hands behind her back in a posture that managed to be both relaxed and somehow regal. Write it again. Speak to me as you would anyone else. Not a queen, not a diplomatic entity, just a person. Marcus looked at her, really looked. At the woman standing alone in a cargo bay, long Altaran ears marking her as visibly other, with power resting on her shoulders like an invisible weight she'd set down just for a moment. He thought about the loneliness that must come with a crown. The isolation of knowing every word spoken to you carried an agenda. The exhaustion of never being able to let your guard down, never being able to just exist without calculation. He exhaled slowly. Well, he said, choosing his words with care and just a hint of the grin that had gotten him in trouble his whole life. You do, in fact, have a very nice ass, Your Majesty. For a heartbeat, the universe held its breath. Then Queen Alara Voss laughed. The sound echoed in the cargo bay, not loudly, not explosively, but enough that Marcus instinctively glanced around, half expecting alarms to blare or drones to descend from the ceiling, demanding an explanation for unauthorized royal joy. None came. The station continued its eternal hum. Conveyors slid crates along their magnetic rails as if a queen laughing with a cargo handler was a perfectly normal feature of interstellar logistics. Alara covered her mouth briefly, a reflex she seemed almost embarrassed by, then let her hand fall. Her ears flicked back, then forward again, recalibrating to some emotion Marcus couldn't read but could somehow feel. I had forgotten what that sounded like, she said softly. My own laughter. Mine, not the diplomatic version. Not the calculated response, just... She trailed off, looking almost surprised. Marcus shifted his weight, suddenly very aware that he was standing in front of one of the most powerful individuals in the known solar system, and had just successfully complemented her posterior without dying. His threat assessment systems were filing this away under situations that should not have resulted in survival. For the record, he said, this is not how my day usually goes. I imagine not. She glanced around the cargo bay, taking in the towering stacks of freight, the flickering status lights on the storage racks, the distant shimmer of a cargo skiff slipping into magnetic clamps on the far side of the bay. Do you always speak so freely here? Only when my brain has clocked out before the rest of me, Marcus replied. Usually I keep my observations safely behind several layers of common sense and basic human decency. She studied him with what looked like renewed interest. Up close, Marcus noticed more details he'd missed in his initial panic. The way her ears responded to sounds, emotions, thoughts, moving independently with an expressiveness human features couldn't match. The intelligence in her eyes, sharp and assessing despite the casual circumstances. The way she held herself, even in workout clothes, like someone used to being the most important person in any room but tired of it. Tell me something, Alara said. When you spoke to me just now, what did you think I would be? Marcus snorted before he could stop himself. Honestly, some overachieving corporate executive with a personal trainer and a sponsorship deal. Station gym memberships cost more than I make in a week. Only people with serious money work out in the good facilities. Her eyebrows rose. You assumed I was wealthy. The gear was too nice. Not nice enough to be showing off, but nice enough to cost more than my monthly rent. So yeah, wealthy but trying not to advertise it. Probably some consultant's kid spending daddy's credits. Marcus paused. I realize now that was a significant miscalculation. You did not see a queen, she said, and there was something almost wistful in her tone. No, ma'am. If I had, I would have panicked silently like a professional instead of panicking loudly like an idiot. That earned him another soft laugh. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, two people who'd somehow stumbled past the normal rules of social interaction into something more real. Alara tilted her head, listening to something Marcus couldn't hear. My schedule believes I am in a private meditation session, she said, almost conversationally. Does your schedule usually believe lies? Marcus asked. It has learned not to argue with me. Marcus nodded appreciatively. Good schedule. Fear-based management works surprisingly well with electronic calendars. She stepped closer again, not invading his space so much as sharing it. The distance between them now was conversational, human scale. Speak to me, she said quietly, not as a subject, as yourself. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit left over from his Navy days. You're really sure about this? Because I should warn you, I complain a lot. Comes with the what? Cargo handlers are professionally disgruntled. I negotiate planetary resource allocations and mediate territorial disputes between species who barely share a common definition of consciousness, Alara said. I believe I can survive complaints about cargo logistics. All right, Marcus said. You want honesty? Fine. Being queen looks exhausting. Everyone bows, nobody relaxes, and I'm guessing it's impossible to tell if anyone actually likes you or just likes what you can do for them. Her ears lowered slightly, a sad gesture, he thought, or maybe resigned. They respect me, she said carefully. That wasn't the question. No, she agreed quietly. It was not. Marcus sighed, surprised at himself. Look, I don't know Altaran customs that well, but humans, we're bad at pretending forever. Eventually we crack. We say stupid things. Sometimes those stupid things are the only real ones we've said all day. Alara considered that, her ears angling forward again in that focused way. Among my people, she said, directness is reserved for family or enemies. It is considered either intimate or hostile, depending on context. So what does that make me? Marcus asked. She met his gaze, and for a moment there was something unguarded in her expression. Something that looked like loneliness recognizing itself in a mirror. An accident, she said, a very interesting accident. A distant chime echoed through the cargo bay, a soft alert indicating an incoming transport. Standard operations, nothing to do with them, but it broke the moment like a stone through glass. Alara glanced toward the bay doors, then back at Marcus, reality reasserting itself. I should go, she said, though she didn't move immediately. There will be questions. My security detail is likely having collective heart failure trying to locate me. Yeah, so, Marcus said. There usually are questions when royalty wanders into loading zones, tends to throw off the schedule. She hesitated, then did something unexpected. She extended her hand. Marcus stared at it. Is this a test? It is a human gesture, Alara said. I have studied your customs. This is appropriate for... She paused, searching. For ending a conversation between equals? You've been studying the wrong humans if you think cargo handlers are equal to queens, Marcus said. But he took her hand anyway. Her grip was warm, firm, surprisingly strong. Hands that signed treaties and held power, but apparently also spent time in gyms. For what it's worth, Marcus said, you seem like a decent person. Ass aside. Her laughter returned, softer this time, but no less genuine. Marcus Reed, she said, and hearing his name in her voice sent an odd jolt through his chest. I believe this will not be our last inappropriate conversation. Your Majesty, Marcus replied, attempting something between a bow and a nod that ended up being neither. Anytime you want to forget who you are, the cargo bay's always open. Well, during my shift. Other times you'd have to deal with Jenkins, and he's terrible at conversation. Just yells about loading procedures. Alara released his hand, but her ears remained angled forward, that clear sign of amusement. As she turned to leave, Marcus called after her. Hey, one thing? She paused, looking back. How did you know my name? I never actually introduced myself. She smiled, and this time it had a hint of that diplomatic polish, the one that suggested she knew things she wasn't sharing. I make it a point to know the names of people who surprise me. It happens rarely enough to be worth the effort. Then she was gone, disappearing into the corridor with that same easy stride, leaving Marcus alone with his crates and his suddenly complicated thoughts. For the first time since his shift began, the universe no longer felt personally offensive. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty corridor entrance. His wrist display beeped insistently, reminding him that container 7748 India wasn't going to load itself. The manifest stretched ahead of him, unchanged, uncaring about the fact that his entire worldview had just been casually rearranged by a queen in workout clothes. He looked at his hand, the one she'd shaken, still warm, still real, not a hallucination then, not a stress-induced breakdown, just the single most surreal conversation of his entire life, which was saying something considering he'd once negotiated supply drops with a Martian warlord who insisted on conducting business entirely in interpretive dance. Marcus returned to work. Container 7748 India. Medical supplies, priority medium. He handled it with the same care as before, checking seals, verifying integrity. But his mind was elsewhere. What the hell just happened? The rational part of his brain, the part trained in logistics and protocol, started building theories. Queen Alara Voss had been touring the station. Security had probably planned her route down to the millimeter. But she'd gone off script, taken a detour through the cargo bay. Why? Testing security response? Personal curiosity? Or maybe she'd heard about the cargo operations and wanted to see them firsthand. She had a reputation as a detail-oriented leader. Maybe she really did care about the infrastructure that kept the Alliance running. Or maybe, whispered the part of his brain that had gotten him discharged from the Navy, maybe she was just tired. Tired of the schedule, the handlers, the endless parade of calculated interactions. Maybe she'd taken a walk looking for 5 minutes of peace and accidentally found something she wasn't expecting. Honesty. Marcus shook his head. That was overthinking it. She was a queen. He was a cargo handler. Their worlds had intersected for exactly 5 minutes due to his big mouth and bad timing. She'd been gracious about it, which spoke well of her, but that was the end of the story. Tomorrow she'd be Kirtan, off to some other diplomatic engagement, and he'd be right back here loading containers. Life would continue as normal. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt strangely hollow. He finished his shift on autopilot, his hands doing the work while his mind replayed the conversation. The way she'd laughed, the way her ears had expressed emotions her face kept carefully neutral. The loneliness in her eyes when she talked about never having real conversations. The warmth of her handshake. The way she'd said his name like it mattered. By the time Marcus clocked out 2 hours later, he'd convinced himself it was a one-time thing. A strange moment, a story he'd probably never tell anyone because who would believe it? The day he insulted a queen and lived to file the paperwork. He caught the transport to the residential rings, squeezed between shift workers and service personnel, all of them wearing the same exhausted expression. His apartment was exactly where he'd left it, a small cube of personal space that smelled like recycled air and old protein bar wrappers. Home sweet home. Marcus collapsed on his bunk without bothering to shower. He should sleep. His body screamed for it, but his brain refused to cooperate, running circles around those 5 minutes in the cargo bay. She'd asked him to be honest, to speak freely, like it was something precious, something rare. He thought about his own history, about the day he'd filed charges against Commander Ashford, about standing in front of the JAG officers, laying out 3 months of documentation proving his commanding officer had been stealing supplies meant for relief operations in the Saturn colonies. Hundreds of families short on food, medicine, basic necessities because one man wanted to pad his retirement fund. Marcus had known what would happen, had known that being right wouldn't protect him, had done it anyway because somebody had to, because honesty mattered more than comfort. The Navy had agreed he was right, had prosecuted Ashford to the full extent of military law, had thanked Marcus for his integrity, and then quietly encouraged him to resign because nobody wanted to work with the guy who broke the code of silence. Honesty had a price, and Marcus had paid it. Maybe that's why Alara's words had hit so hard. She lived in a world where honesty was the rarest commodity of all, where every interaction came wrapped in calculation and political maneuvering. At least Marcus had chosen his isolation. She'd inherited hers with a crown. His wrist display buzzed. Incoming message. Probably Jenkins complaining about the loading patterns Marcus had used, or scheduling, letting him know about tomorrow's shift changes. He almost ignored it, but something made him check. The message was from an unknown sender, routed through official Alliance channels, with encryption markers that suggested very high-level security. Marcus's heart rate kicked up a notch. Those kind of messages either meant you'd won the lottery or you were about to be arrested, and Marcus was pretty sure he hadn't bought a lottery ticket. He opened it. Mr. Reed, tomorrow, 1400 hours, Cargo Bay 4. I would like to continue our conversation about inappropriate topics. Please be prepared to complain extensively about station operations. I find I am developing a taste for honesty. EV. Marcus read it 3 times, then a 4th, just to be sure he wasn't hallucinating. EV Alara Voss. The Queen wanted to meet him. Again. Tomorrow. To talk. He should decline. Should send back a polite message explaining that continuing these meetings would be inappropriate, that he had work to do, that surely Her Majesty had more important concerns than chatting with a cargo handler. Should do a lot of things. Instead, Marcus found himself typing, 1400 works. I'll bring the complaints. You bring the ability to handle brutal honesty about supply chain inefficiencies. Fair warning, it's not pretty. MR. He hit send before common sense could intervene. Then he lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Queens didn't develop friendships with cargo handlers. That wasn't how the universe worked. There were rules, hierarchies, appropriate boundaries. He'd learned that the hard way in the Navy, but maybe, whispered the part of him that had survived discharge and rejection and 2 years of rebuilding, maybe rules were meant to be broken sometimes. Maybe honesty was worth the risk. Maybe a queen who wanted real conversation and a cargo handler who'd already lost everything for telling the truth could find something valuable in the space between their worlds. Or maybe he was overthinking it, and tomorrow would be another disaster that somehow didn't get him arrested. Either way, it would be interesting. Marcus closed his eyes. Sleep came easier than expected, carrying dreams of cargo bays and laughter, and the strange warmth of human connection in the cold void of space. Somewhere in the royal quarters of Liberty Station, Alara Voss sat alone in her suite, looking at the same message exchange on her private display. Her advisors would be furious if they knew. Security would have collective aneurysms. Protocol officers would file formal complaints spanning several systems. But for the first time in 15 years, Alara felt something other than the weight of her crown. She felt curious, alive. Like maybe there was more to existence than diplomatic treaties and calculated responses. Tomorrow she would speak with Marcus Reed again. They would talk about cargo logistics and supply chain inefficiencies, and probably nothing of political importance whatsoever. And it would be the most real conversation she'd had in years. Her ears angled forward in anticipation, and in the privacy of her quarters, Queen Alara Voss allowed herself a genuine smile. Marcus decided 2 things during the 23 hours between receiving that message and 1400 the next day. First, the universe had a deeply ironic sense of humor. Second, if the Stellar Alliance ever needed a cautionary tale about unintended consequences, his personnel file would make excellent required reading. He showed up 15 minutes early to Cargo Bay 4, which was smaller than his usual workspace but quieter, tucked away in a section of the station that handled low-priority civilian shipments. The kind of place where supervisors rarely bothered checking and security cameras had convenient blind spots. Smart choice for a queen trying to avoid attention. Marcus had showered. Twice. Changed into his cleanest work coveralls, which still had a faint oil stain near the left pocket, but at least didn't smell like recycled sweat in cargo bay ambiance. He'd even attempted to do something with his hair, though it had responded to his efforts with its usual defiant chaos. Then he'd spent 10 minutes talking himself out of bringing flowers before remembering that A, he couldn't afford flowers on station prices, B, bringing flowers to a queen was probably some kind of protocol violation, and C, she'd asked him to complain about logistics, not court her like some romantic idiot. Still, he'd checked his reflection 3 times before leaving his quarters, just to be sure he looked professional, presentable, not like a man whose life had taken a sharp left turn into surreal territory and was still trying to find the steering wheel. At 13:55, he was reorganizing containers that didn't need reorganizing, just to give his hands something to do. At 13:58, he started wondering if this was an elaborate prank. At 13:59, he questioned every life choice that had led to this moment. At 1400 exactly, she arrived. No disguise this time, at least not much of one. Alara wore a maintenance tech's jacket that was slightly too large, dark utility pants, and a cap pulled low enough to shadow her face but not low enough to actually hide her ears, which still rose through her blonde hair like elegant markers of her otherness. Anyone who looked twice would recognize her. But on Liberty Station, most people had learned not to look twice at anything that wasn't actively threatening them. She spotted Marcus immediately, and something in her posture relaxed. Relief, maybe, or just the same uncertainty he felt. 2 people stepping into uncharted social territory without a map. "You came," she said. "You're the queen," Marcus replied. Felt like declining might be unwise. "Also, you promised I could complain, and I've been storing up material for years." That earned him a smile. Her ears angled forward. That gesture he was learning meant attention or interest. She looked around the cargo bay, taking in the stacked containers, the humming environmental systems, the play of shadows and industrial lighting. "This is where you work?" "Not usually. Bay 4 handles civilian overflow, agricultural equipment, personal effects, the occasional illegal pet smuggling operation that Customs hasn't caught yet. It's quieter than the main bays, less supervision." Marcus paused. "I'm guessing that's why you picked it." "I may have researched optimal locations for unscheduled conversations," Alara admitted. She moved deeper into the bay, her footsteps echoing softly. "My security detail believes I am reviewing station infrastructure reports in my quarters. The reports are quite lengthy. I have approximately 1 hour before anyone becomes concerned." "An hour to complain about logistics," Marcus said. "You really know how to show a guy a good time." She turned to face him, and there was that same unguarded quality he'd seen yesterday, like she'd left the crown in her quarters along with her formal attire. "You said something yesterday that I have been unable to stop thinking about." Marcus's mind raced through their conversation, landing on several candidates that ranged from mildly inappropriate to career-ending. "I said several things yesterday. You're going to have to be more specific." "You said honesty is what remains when people are too tired to pretend." Her ears tilted slightly, thoughtful. "I have found this compelling." "Yeah, well," Marcus leaned against a container, trying for casual and probably missing by several degrees. "Exhaustion is humanity's truth serum. We're all one bad day away from saying what we actually think instead of what we're supposed to think. It's both our greatest weakness and occasionally our only saving grace." Alara stepped closer, her expression intent. "In my world, everything is pretense. Every word is calculated. Every gesture means something. Even silence carries political weight." She paused, searching for words. "I forget sometimes what it feels like to simply speak, to have a conversation that exists only in that moment, with no echoes into policy or perception." Marcus studied her. In the industrial lighting, without the formal trappings of royalty, she looked younger somehow. Tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight nobody else could see. "How long has it been," he asked quietly, "since you had a real conversation?" She considered the question. 15 years, perhaps longer. I was 18 when my parents died, when the crown passed to me, but even before that, I was being prepared, trained, taught to calculate every interaction. By the time I became queen, I had already forgotten how to simply talk to someone without considering the consequences. That's a long time to be alone in a room full of people. Her eyes met his, and there was recognition there. Understanding. Yes, that is exactly what it feels like. They stood in silence for a moment, not awkward, but weighted with things neither of them quite knew how to articulate. Finally, Marcus pushed off from the container. All right, you want to learn how to have a real conversation? Here's lesson one. Start with something small and inconsequential. Weather's a classic, but we're on a space station, so the weather is always artificial and slightly too dry. So instead, let's talk about food. Ilara blinked. Food? Yeah. What did you have for breakfast? I... She paused, clearly thrown by the question. A nutritionally balanced meal prepared by the Royal Kitchen staff. Protein, complex carbohydrates, appropriate vitamin supplementation. Marcus winced. Okay. No, that's not an answer. That's a medical report. Try again. What did it taste like? Did you enjoy it? She frowned, the kind of frown that suggested she was genuinely trying to remember. I do not recall. I was reading briefing documents while eating. I finished the meal because my schedule required it, not because... I suppose I did not think about whether I enjoyed it. When's the last time you ate something just because you wanted to? Because it tasted good? Alara's silence was answer enough. Marcus shook his head. Okay, new rule. Tomorrow morning you eat something you actually want. Not what the nutritionist recommends, not what protocol suggests. Something that makes you happy, even if it's terrible for you, especially if it's terrible for you. I am not certain my kitchen staff knows how to prepare food that is not optimized for health, she said, but there was a hint of amusement in her tone. Then figure it out. Sneak down to the civilian cafeteria, find the greasiest, most inappropriate breakfast on the menu. Eat it slowly, actually taste it. Marcus grinned. I guarantee you the galaxy will not collapse because the queen had pancakes with too much syrup. She laughed, soft and genuine. Pancakes with too much syrup. That seems almost rebellious. It is rebellious, that's the point. You've spent 15 years being perfect. Permission granted to be occasionally imperfect. Alara moved to one of the containers, running her hand along its surface. Her expression had shifted, thoughtful and a little vulnerable. You make it sound simple. It is simple. People make it complicated. Marcus joined her, leaning against the container. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand what it's like to be queen. But I do know what it's like to lose yourself in a role. In the Navy, I was Lieutenant Reed. Every decision filtered through regulations, protocols, chain of command. I thought that's what professionalism meant. Being the rank instead of the person. What changed? I saw something wrong and reported it. My commanding officer was stealing supplies. Relief shipments for civilian settlements. I had documentation, evidence, everything by the book. I did exactly what protocol demanded. Marcus's jaw tightened. Turned out, being right isn't the same as being protected. The Navy thanked me for my integrity and then quietly suggested I'd be happier somewhere else. Nobody wants to work with the guy who broke Omerta. Alara's ears lowered, a gesture of sympathy or sadness. They punished you for honesty. They punished me for making them uncomfortable. There's a difference, there is. He met her eyes. But I'd do it again, because at the end of the day, I could look at myself in the mirror. The rank didn't matter. The uniform didn't matter. What mattered was being able to live with my choices. That is remarkably principled. That's remarkably stupid, Marcus corrected. Principles don't pay bills. They don't get you hired. They just make sure you sleep well at night while unemployment slowly destroys your life. He smiled without humor. But yeah, I'd still do it again. They stood together in the quiet of the cargo bay, two people who'd paid different prices for similar choices. Finally, Alara spoke. Tell me about your work, not the procedures, what it feels like, why you do it. Marcus snorted. You want the honest answer? Most days it feels like being a cog in a machine that barely notices I exist. I move bodies from point A to point B. The boxes don't care. The machine doesn't care. It's repetitive, boring, and pays just enough to keep me housed and fed. That sounds terrible. It is terrible, but it's also, he paused, looking for the right words. It's simple, clean, no politics, no manipulation. A container needs to get somewhere. I get it there. Success is measurable. Failure is obvious. There's a purity to it that I appreciate. After years of navigating bureaucracy and watching people play games with other people's lives, there's something satisfying about work that's just work. Alara listened with that intense focus, her ears angled forward. You find meaning in this simplicity. I find peace in it. Meaning's overrated anyway. Peace is harder to come by. She was quiet for a long moment, processing that. Then, I envy you. Marcus laughed, surprised. You're a queen of 14 systems. You literally have the power to reshape civilizations, and you envy the guy moving boxes in a warehouse? I envy your certainty, your ability to choose simplicity. My life is complexity layered upon complexity, and I cannot step away from it. I cannot choose peace. I can only navigate the endless complications and hope I make more right decisions than wrong ones. The weight in her voice hit Marcus harder than he expected. He thought about what it would be like, carrying the fates of billions on your shoulders, knowing every choice rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict or control, never being able to just walk away from the pressure. That sounds lonely, he said quietly. It is the loneliest existence I can imagine. She turned to face him fully, which is why I am here. Why I came back. Because yesterday, for 5 minutes, I was not lonely. I was not a queen managing perceptions. I was simply a person having an honest conversation with another person. Do you have any idea how rare that is for me? Marcus met her gaze, saw the vulnerability there, the hope, the desperate hunger for something real in a life built entirely of carefully constructed illusions. He understood it more than he wanted to admit. All right, he said, then let's make a deal. When you're here in this cargo bay, you're not the queen. You're just Alara, and I'm just Marcus. No titles, no protocols. We talk like normal people talk. No calculation, no consequences. Whatever is said here stays here. Clean slate, every time. Her eyes widened slightly. You would do that? I'm already doing it. You're the one who needs to decide if you can. Alara was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see the war happening behind her eyes. The training of 15 years versus the yearning for something genuine. The weight of responsibility versus the human need for connection. Finally, she nodded. Yes, I can do that. I want to do that. Good. Marcus pushed off from the container. Then let's start over. Hi, I'm Marcus Reed. I move boxes for a living. I drink too much bad coffee, and I have strong opinions about supply chain management. Nice to meet you. A smile spread across her face, genuine and unguarded. I am Alara. I negotiate treaties and mediate disputes. I have not eaten food I actually enjoyed in longer than I can remember. And I have absolutely no idea what I am doing right now, but I think I like it. Welcome to the club. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just pretending and hoping nobody notices. She laughed, that same sound from yesterday, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest. This could work. This strange, impossible friendship between a queen and a cargo handler, if they were both brave enough to let it. They spent the next 40 minutes talking. Real talking, not the careful, diplomatic dance Alara was used to. Marcus complained extensively about the station's inventory management system, which he described as designed by someone who'd never actually moved cargo and possibly hated efficiency on a personal level. Alara found herself fascinated by the minutiae, by the practical problems Marcus solved every day, by the gap between theoretical procedures and actual implementation. So what you are saying, she said at one point, is that the system works in theory but fails in practice because it does not account for human behavior. Exactly. The algorithm assumes everyone follows protocol perfectly, but Jenkins never scans containers properly. Rodriguez always takes smoking breaks during peak hours, and the loading drones have a 2-second delay that nobody accounts for. So what should take 30 minutes takes 90, and suddenly we're behind schedule and scrambling. Marcus gestured emphatically. Good system design accounts for human imperfection. This system punishes it instead. Ilara's mind raced. That is, that is how most political systems function as well. We design ideal solutions that assume perfect implementation. Then we are surprised when reality proves messy. Welcome to the real world. It's disappointing, but at least the coffee's cheap. Well, terrible and cheap. She smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression now. Something that suggested wheels turning, connections forming. Marcus had the sudden sense that he'd accidentally taught her something important, though he wasn't quite sure what. A soft chime from her wrist display interrupted the moment. Alara glanced at it, and something in her posture shifted, the queen returning, even if just partially. I need to go. I have a council briefing in 20 minutes, and appearing directly from a cargo bay would raise questions I am not prepared to answer. Yeah, probably not great for the whole maintaining appropriate royal dignity thing. She looked at him, and there was warmth in her expression. Gratitude. Can I return? Tomorrow, perhaps? Marcus knew he should say no, should recognize that this was dangerous territory, that befriending royalty never ended well for the commoner in the equation, should protect himself the way he'd failed to do in the Navy. But he also remembered what loneliness felt like, what it meant to find someone who saw you instead of your utility, and he couldn't quite bring himself to take that away from someone who needed it as badly as Alara clearly did. Same time, same place, he said, but you're bringing the complaints next time. Fair's fair. Her ears angled back in what Marcus was now certain was amusement. I believe I can manage that. 15 years of queenship has provided ample material. She turned to leave, then paused at the bay entrance. Marcus, thank you for this, for treating me like a person instead of a position. That's what friends do, he said, surprising himself with the word. Friends. When had he decided that's what they were? But looking at her expression, the way hope and happiness mixed together in her eyes, he realized it was true. Improbable, impossible, bound to end badly, but true nonetheless. Friends? Alara repeated softly, tasting the word. Yes, I would like that very much. Then she was gone, slipping back into the station's quarters, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that his life had just become significantly more complicated. Over the next 3 weeks, a pattern emerged. Alara came to Cargo Bay 4 almost every day, sometimes in terrible disguises that fooled exactly nobody but which the station personnel had apparently decided to collectively ignore, sometimes with only a jacket and cap. Once, memorably, in what she claimed was a courier uniform, but which Marcus pointed out still had the Royal House cleaning tags attached. They talked about everything and nothing. Marcus taught her about logistics, efficiency theory, the strange social dynamics of station workers. Alara talked about the impossible weight of decision-making, about negotiating with species whose very concepts of reality differed from human understanding, about the loneliness of being the final word on matters of life and death. She learned to complain, started hesitantly, apologizing after every criticism, until Marcus told her that apologizing defeated the entire purpose. By week 2, she could deliver a solid 10-minute rant about the inefficiency of Alliance bureaucratic procedures that had Marcus genuinely impressed. He learned to listen, not to fix, not to solve, just to hear. To understand that sometimes people with impossible responsibilities just needed someone to acknowledge that yes, it was impossible, and yes, they were doing their best anyway. They discovered shared humor in the absurdities of their respective worlds. Ilara's story about a 3-hour diplomatic session debating the emotional implications of seating arrangements had Marcus laughing until his ribs hurt. His account of the time an agricultural equipment shipment turned out to be 17 illegal chickens had her in tears. The line between professional distance and genuine friendship blurred, then disappeared entirely. They became, against all odds and common sense, friends, real friends. The kind where comfortable silence was as valuable as conversation, where you could be yourself without performance or pretense. Marcus told himself it was fine. That friendship across class boundaries wasn't unprecedented. That as long as they kept it private, kept it to these stolen hours in an overlooked cargo bin, Nobody would care, and nothing would change. He was, of course, catastrophically wrong. The problem started with Declan Thorne. Declan was 24, fresh-faced, and took his security duties with the earnest seriousness of someone who still believed the system worked. He'd noticed anomalies in the Queen's movement patterns. Nothing dramatic, just small deviations from her official schedule. 15-minute gaps here, 20-minute gaps there. Always in the afternoon, always in the same general sector. Being a diligent officer, Declan investigated, pulled footage, tracked patterns, connected dots, and discovered that Queen Alara Voss, sovereign of the Stellar Alliance, was making regular unsupervised visits to Cargo Bay 4, where she spent an hour talking with a cargo handler named Marcus Reed. Declan panicked. Visions of security breaches, assassination plots, diplomatic incidents danced through his young mind. He did what protocol demanded, reported it up the chain of command. The report landed on the desk of Captain Lyra Blackwell. Lyra Blackwell had spent 30 years in station security, working her way up from patrol officer to head of operations through a combination of competence, political savvy, and a finely tuned sense of when to follow protocol and when to quietly ignore it. She read Declan's report, reviewed the footage herself, and made a decision that would have significant consequences for everyone involved. She called Adriana Kael. Adriana Kael, senior advisor to Queen Alara Voss, former intelligence analyst, and the closest thing Alara had to a friend among her staff, received Blackwell's private message with a mixture of amusement and concern. She'd suspected something was different about Alara these past weeks. The Queen seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. She smiled more, laughed occasionally, seemed almost happy. Adriana pulled the same footage Declan had found, watched Alara and Marcus talk, saw the body language of two people genuinely comfortable with each other, saw Alara's ears expressing emotions her face had learned to hide, saw Marcus treating her like a person instead of an institution. And Adriana made a choice. She erased nothing, changed nothing in the official records. But she sent a private message to Blackwell. Continue monitoring for actual security threats. Do not intervene in the meetings themselves. This is not a security issue. This is a mental health necessity. Then she called Declan into her office and had a very frank conversation about the difference between security threats and personal privacy. About how sometimes the best way to protect someone was to give them space to be human. About how young officers who showed discretion often found their careers advancing faster than those who blindly followed every protocol. Declan, to his credit, understood. He would keep watching, keep monitoring, but he would not report further unless actual danger presented itself. The circle of people who knew about Marcus and Alara's meetings expanded from 2 to 4, and for 3 days, nothing changed. Marcus and Alara continued their conversations, blissfully unaware that their secret was now an open secret, protected by people who decided that sometimes rules existed to be broken. Then the announcement came. The Kepler Union would be sending a diplomatic delegation to Liberty Station in 2 weeks. High-level negotiations regarding trade routes and resource allocation. Mandatory attendance for Queen Alara and her senior advisors. Duration, estimated 1 week. The Kepler Union was known for aggressive negotiating tactics. They used protocol as a weapon, tradition as a bludgeon. They would come prepared to push every advantage, exploit every weakness, and extract every concession they could. And they were very, very good at it. Marcus saw the change immediately when Alara arrived at Cargo Bay 4 the day after the announcement. Her shoulders were tight, her movements less fluid. Her ears held that flat, neutral position that suggested carefully controlled stress. "Rough day?" he asked. "The Kepler delegation," she said without preamble. "They are arriving in 2 weeks." "Okay, I'm guessing from your tone that's bad." She began pacing, a restless energy Marcus hadn't seen before. The Kepler Union specializes in diplomatic warfare. They use every tool available: precedent, tradition, calculated insult, strategic delay. They will spend the entire week attempting to corner me, force concessions, establish dominance. Her hands clenched. And I will have to play their game, use their tactics, become the calculating, cold political entity they expect. Marcus watched her pace, seeing the frustration and fear beneath the words. You're worried you'll lose yourself again. She stopped, turning to face him. I have been different these past weeks, lighter, more myself. These conversations with you have reminded me of who I am beneath the crown. But when the delegation arrives, I will have to put all of that aside, become the queen they expect. And I am afraid that once I do, I will not be able to find my way back. The vulnerability in her voice hit Marcus hard. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Hey, listen to me. You're not going to lose yourself. You know why? Because you've learned the most powerful weapon in any negotiation. What weapon? Honesty. Alara blinked. I do not understand. Diplomatic negotiations are built on careful obfuscation and strategic positioning. Honesty is a liability. Honesty is a surprise attack, Marcus corrected. Everyone expects you to play the game. Position, counter-position, veiled threats, calculated responses. They've prepared for that. They've practiced against that. He met her eyes. But what happens when you don't play? When you ask direct questions? When you admit limitations honestly and ask them to do the same? When you treat negotiation like problem solving instead of warfare? They would think I was weak. Initially, maybe, but here's the thing about honesty. It's destabilizing. People don't know how to respond when you break the script. And while they're scrambling to recalibrate, you've already moved the conversation to different ground. Ground you control because you set the terms. Alara's ears angled forward, that focused attention. You are suggesting I negotiate honestly? With the Kepler Union? I'm suggesting you negotiate like yourself, the person you've been in this cargo bay. Not the queen they expect, the queen you actually are. Marcus smiled. Think about it. Every advantage they have depends on prediction, on knowing how you'll respond. But if you're genuinely honest, genuinely yourself, they can't predict you. You become the unknown variable. She was silent for a long moment, mind visibly working. Then something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope, but possibility. That is either brilliant or catastrophically foolish. Probably both, Marcus admitted. But you're going to be miserable either way. Might as well be miserable doing something different, something real, something that doesn't require you to abandon every piece of yourself you've reclaimed. Alara moved closer, and there was something fierce in her eyes now. Determination mixed with fear, but determination winning. Will you help me these next 2 weeks? Help me prepare for honest negotiation instead of diplomatic theater? Marcus should have said no, should have recognized that he was in way over his head, that teaching a queen how to negotiate with hostile powers was so far outside his expertise, it had entered theoretical territory. But he looked at her face, at the hope and trust there, and found himself nodding. Yeah, I'll help. But fair warning, I'm making this up and I go. I just move boxes and have opinions about efficiency. You also taught me how to complain, how to eat food I enjoy, and how to value honesty over calculation, Alara said. I believe that qualifies you adequately. So they began, 2 weeks of intensive, bizarre preparation. Marcus taught Alara everything he'd learned about honest communication in high-stress situations. How to ask questions that revealed more than they answered. How to acknowledge limitations without apologizing for them. How to turn vulnerability into strength by refusing to pretend invulnerability. Alara was a quick study. She'd spent 15 years mastering diplomatic protocols. Learning to break them strategically came naturally once she understood the principle. They practiced scenarios, role-played negotiations, found the balance between honesty and tactical awareness. And somewhere in those 2 weeks, as the delegation's arrival drew closer, both Marcus and Alara became aware of a fact they'd been carefully avoiding. Their friendship had attracted attention. Adriana Kale appeared at Cargo Bay 4 on day 9 of their preparation. Marcus looked up from explaining supply chain negotiation tactics to find the senior advisor standing at the bay entrance, her expression unreadable. Your Majesty, Adriana said calmly, we need to talk. The silence that followed Adriana's words felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Marcus's hands froze mid-gesture, his explanation about tactical questioning dying in his throat. Alara's entire posture shifted, shoulders straightening, ears moving to that carefully neutral position that meant she was preparing for confrontation. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Alara spoke, her voice carrying that measured quality Marcus had learned meant she was buying time to think. Adriana, I was not expecting you. Clearly, Adriana stepped into the cargo bay, her footsteps echoing in the industrial space. She was a woman in her mid-40s with steel gray hair cut efficiently short and eyes that suggested she'd seen every variation of human deception and found most of them tedious. Mr. Reed, I presume. Marcus nodded, trying to project a confidence he absolutely did not feel. That's me, Marcus Reed, cargo operations. Not a security threat, if that's what you're wondering. I'm aware of what you are, Adriana said. Her tone wasn't hostile, which somehow made it worse. Hostility Marcus could handle. This clinical assessment felt like being dissected by someone who knew exactly where all your vulnerabilities were located. Former Navy Lieutenant, Supply Corps, honorably discharged 2 years ago after reporting your commanding officer for embezzlement. Currently employed as a cargo handler, grade 3, clean security record. No political affiliations. No criminal history beyond a noise complaint filed by a neighbor 16 months ago. Marcus blinked. You ran a background check. 3 of them. Different agencies, different methodologies, cross-reference results. Adriana's expression didn't change. I have known about these meetings for 2 weeks, Mr. Reed, since they began. The bottom dropped out of Marcus's stomach. He glanced at Alara, who looked equally stunned. You knew, Alara said. This entire time you knew and you said nothing? Correct. Why? No. Adriana was quiet for a moment, studying them both. When she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been sympathy. Because you were happy, Your Majesty. For the first time since you took the crown, you seem genuinely happy. And I have learned, over many years of service, that sometimes protecting you means protecting your ability to be human. Alara's ears flicked back, surprise breaking through her controlled expression. You were protecting me? In my way, yes, though I should note that Captain Blackwell deserves equal credit. She recognized the situation for what it was and chose discretion over protocol, as did Security Officer Thorne once I explained the stakes. Adriana moved closer, her gaze shifting between them. Your meetings have been monitored for security purposes, but the content of your conversations has remained private. No recordings, no transcripts. What you have shared here has stayed here. Marcus felt something unclench in his chest. So we're not in trouble? That depends on your definition of trouble. Adriana turned her full attention to Marcus. Mr. Reed, do you understand what you have been doing? Having conversations with a friend? Teaching the Queen of the Stellar Alliance to abandon 15 years of diplomatic training in favor of what you call honest negotiation. Adriana's tone was dry. The Kepler delegation arrives in 5 days. They are expecting a particular kind of opponent. You have been systematically dismantling that opponent and replacing her with something unpredictable. That's the idea, Marcus said a little defensively. Unpredictable is good, keeps them off balance. Unpredictable is dangerous, Adriana corrected. For everyone involved, including you. She looked at Alara. Your Majesty, I need to know. Are you truly planning to negotiate with the Kepler Union using Mr. Reed's approach? Alara met her advisor's gaze steadily. I am. Against all precedent, against all protocol, against the advice of every diplomatic expert in the alliance. Yes. Adriana studied her for a long moment. Then surprisingly, she smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but genuine. Good. About time someone shook things up. The old approaches clearly were not working as well as we pretended. Marcus stared. Wait, you're okay with this? I am pragmatic, Mr. Reed. The truth is, Queen Alara's approval ratings have been declining for 3 years. The public perception is that she is cold, calculating, distant, effective, but not beloved. If she continues on that trajectory, she will face serious political challenges within 5 years. Adriana gestured toward Alara. But these past 3 weeks, public appearances where you have actually smiled, brief interactions with station personnel where you treated them like people instead of obstacles, the polls have shifted. People are noticing. They like what they see. You have been tracking my public perception? Ilara asked. It is literally my job. Adriana pulled up a data display on her wrist device. Approval rating 3 weeks ago, 58%. Approval rating today, 67%. The change correlates directly with your behavioral shift, with whatever Mr. Reed has been teaching you about being human instead of being a crown. Marcus felt surreal. So you're saying that being honest works? I am saying that authenticity is valuable political currency, and Queen Alara has rediscovered hers. Adriana closed the display. However, that does not mean the Kepler negotiation will be easy. Ambassador Kren is 60 years old and has never lost a negotiation. He will arrive expecting to dominate through traditional means. If you surprise him, he will adapt quickly. You will need to be better than surprising. You will need to be convincing. I can be convincing, Alara said quietly. Can you? Adriana's gaze was sharp. Because the moment you sit across from Kren, every instinct you have developed over 15 years will tell you to fall back on old patterns, to protect yourself through calculation, to hide behind protocol. Can you resist that? Can you be genuinely honest when everything in you screams that honesty is vulnerability? Alara was silent. Marcus saw the uncertainty flash across her face, saw her ears dip slightly. Then she glanced at him, and something steadied in her expression. Yes, I can, because I have been practicing with the most brutally honest person I have ever met. Hey, Marcus said, I prefer tactically candid. That earned him a smile from Alara, and even Adriana's expression softened slightly. The advisor sighed. Very well, if we are doing this, we do it properly. Mr. Reed, you will need to be briefed on the political stakes. The Kepler Union is not simply negotiating trade routes. They are testing whether Queen Alara can be manipulated. If they succeed, every other system in the alliance will attempt similar tactics. This negotiation is about power dynamics as much as practical concerns. Great, Marcus said, no pressure. Substantial pressure, Adriana corrected. But I believe you may be uniquely suited to help. Your background in logistics means you understand practical constraints. Your history of whistleblowing means you understand the cost of honesty, and your complete lack of diplomatic training means you are not trapped by conventional thinking. You're really good at making insults sound like compliments, Marcus observed. It is a developed skill. Adriana turned back to Alara. Your Majesty, I will support this approach. But you need to understand the risks. If you fail, if Kren outmaneuvers you, the political consequences will be severe. The Council will use it as evidence that you have become soft, ineffective. There may be calls for your abdication. Marcus's blood went cold. Abdication? They can do that. The Stellar Alliance is a constitutional monarchy. Adriana explained. The Queen serves at the will of the Council, which represents the member systems. If they lose confidence in her leadership, they can force a succession vote. It has happened twice in Alliance history. Both times, the monarch in question chose to abdicate rather than face the humiliation of being removed. That's insane, Marcus said. She's been queen for 15 years. She rebuilt half the Alliance after the Proxima Wars. One negotiation shouldn't erase all that. Politics is not rational, Mr. Reed. It is emotional and reactive and often cruel. Adriana's expression was grim, which is why this matters. If Queen Alara succeeds, if she proves that authentic leadership is effective leadership, she secures her position for another generation. If she fails, everything she has built will be questioned. The weight of that settled over the cargo bay like physical pressure. Marcus looked at Alara, seeing the fear in her eyes now, the understanding of what she was risking. Maybe we should reconsider, he said quietly. Maybe the old approach is safer. Safer, Alara repeated. Yes, and I would be miserable, and alone, and slowly losing myself piece by piece until there was nothing left but the crown. She shook her head. No, I have spent 3 weeks remembering who I am. I will not surrender that because the stakes are high. If anything, the stakes make it more important. Spoken like someone with more courage than sense, Adriana said, but there was approval in her tone. Very well, we have 5 days. Mr. Reed, you and I will work together. I will provide political context and strategic framework. You will continue teaching Queen Alara how to be impossibly, dangerously honest. Between us, perhaps we can create something that actually works. And if it doesn't, Marcus asked, then we all look for new employment, Adriana said dryly. I suggest we be very, very good at what we do. The next 5 days were intense. Adriana was true to her word. She brought Marcus into the planning sessions, gave him access to diplomatic briefings and background files on the Kepler Union and Ambassador Kren. Marcus learned more about interstellar politics in 5 days than he'd learned in his entire Navy career. The Kepler Union was a confederation of mining colonies in the outer systems. Rich in resources, poor in infrastructure, they needed alliance trade routes and technology, but they also deeply resented being dependent on the alliance, resented the perception that they were junior partners in the relationship. Their negotiating style reflected that resentment, aggressive, demanding, designed to extract maximum concessions while demonstrating they couldn't be pushed around. Ambassador Kren was legendary, 60 years old, veteran of 40 major negotiations, never once accepted less than his opening demands. He used a combination of historical precedent, protocol manipulation, and sheer intimidation to dominate every interaction. Other diplomats prepared for Kren the way soldiers prepared for battle. He will try to establish dominance immediately, Adriana explained during one briefing session. Seating arrangements, order of speaking, even the temperature of the room. Everything is a tool. He will expect you to counter-maneuver, to play the same game. When you do not, he will be briefly confused. That confusion is your window. Window for what? Alara asked. For being yourself, Marcus said. For asking the questions nobody asks. For treating him like a person instead of an opponent. They practiced scenarios. Adriana would play Kren, aggressive and demanding. Alara would respond with honest questions, genuine curiosity, acknowledgement of limitations. It felt wrong at first, every diplomatic instinct screaming that she was giving away too much. But gradually she found the balance. The place where honesty became strength instead of weakness. Marcus watched her transform. Not back into the calculating queen she'd been, but into something new. Someone who could acknowledge vulnerability without being weak. Someone who could be honest without being naive. Someone who used authenticity as strategy rather than abandoning strategy for authenticity. On the third day of preparation, Captain Lyra Blackwell joined their sessions. She brought a security perspective, walking them through potential scenarios where the negotiations might go wrong. Threats to watch for, contingencies to prepare. Her presence was steadying, professional, and Marcus found himself grateful for her calm competence. On the fourth day, Declan Thorne appeared at Cargo Bay 4, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. Your Majesty, he said formally, I wanted to apologize. I reported your meetings to Captain Blackwell because I was concerned for your safety. I did not mean to invade your privacy. Alara studied the young security officer. You were doing your duty. That is commendable. But I should have understood better. Declan looked at Marcus, then back at Alara. I've been watching the footage, not listening, just watching. And I can see that you are happier, that whatever is happening here is good for you. I wanted you to know that I will protect that. If you want to continue these meetings, I will make sure the security records reflect nothing unusual. That is within my authority. Why? Alara asked. Declan hesitated. Because my mother spent 30 years making everyone else happy while forgetting how to be happy herself. And I swore I would not do that to anyone if I had the power to prevent it. He straightened. You deserve to be happy, Your Majesty. Even queens deserve that. The simple sincerity of it hit harder than elaborate speeches would have. Alara's ears angled back, emotion showing through. Thank you, Officer Thorne. That means more than you know. After Declan left, Adriana looked at Marcus. You have created ripples, Mr. Reed. People are noticing, choosing sides, deciding that maybe the Queen's humanity matters more than perfect protocol. Is that a problem? It is a revolution, Adriana said quietly. A small one contained to this station for now. But revolutions have a way of spreading. We had best be prepared for where this leads. The night before the Kepler delegation arrived, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that could go wrong. About how he'd somehow convinced a queen to gamble her entire position on his half-formed theories about honest communication. About how if this failed, it wouldn't just be his career ending this time. It would be Alara's reign, Adriana's reputation, maybe the stability of the alliance itself. No pressure. His wrist display buzzed. Private message from Alara. Cannot sleep. Walk with me? Marcus should have said no, should have maintained appropriate boundaries, should have done a lot of things he didn't do. Instead, he replied, meet you at Observation Deck C in 10 minutes. The observation deck was deserted at 0300 hours. Nothing to see but stars in the distant curve of Mars, red and ancient and indifferent to human drama. Alara was already there when Marcus arrived, standing at the viewport in casual clothes, her ears uncovered and relaxed. Tomorrow, she said without preamble. Tomorrow, Marcus agreed, moving to stand beside her. They watched the stars in silence for a while. Finally, Alara spoke. What if I fail? What if your approach does not work? What if I freeze and fall back on old patterns? Then you adapt, adjust, try something different. Marcus glanced at her. The goal isn't perfection, it's authenticity. If authentic, you mean sometimes being uncertain or scared or making mistakes, then show that. It's still better than the alternative. The alternative being pretending to be perfect until you forget how to be real. Alara's ears tilted forward. You have a way of making complicated things sound simple. That's because most complicated things are simple things that people have overthought. Marcus smiled. Look, tomorrow you'll sit across from Kren. He'll try to intimidate you. You'll ask him honest questions. He'll be confused. You'll keep being honest until he either adapts and engages genuinely, or he doesn't and looks like an ass in front of witnesses. Either way, you win. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, it's terrifying, but it's also right. And sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. She turned to face him fully. How are you so certain? Because I already paid the price for honesty once, Marcus said quietly. Lost my career, my reputation, my future. And you know what? I'd do it again. Because at least I can live with myself. At least I know who I am. That's worth more than comfort or security or fitting in. He met her eyes. You have the chance to be both powerful and honest. That's rare. Don't waste it because you're afraid. Alara was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. Thank you, Marcus, for all of this. For teaching me to complain and eat pancakes and ask inconvenient questions. For reminding me that being queen does not mean surrendering being human. Thank you for trusting me despite overwhelming evidence that I'm making this up as I go. She laughed, soft and genuine. They stood together watching the stars, two improbable friends on the edge of something that would change everything or destroy them both. The universe spun on, indifferent and beautiful, and Marcus felt oddly at peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least they'd tried. At least they'd chosen honesty over comfort. That had to count for something. The Kepler delegation arrived at 0900 hours with the efficiency of people who had made an art form of intimidation through logistics. 3 shifts, perfect formation, docking with synchronized precision that suggested either meticulous planning or showing off. Probably both. The diplomatic party disembarked into the station's formal receiving area, where Queen Alara waited with her advisors and honor guard. Marcus watched from the gallery above, along with other station personnel. He wasn't part of the official delegation, had no role in the formal proceedings, but Adriana had arranged credentials that gave him observation access. You should see what you have created, she'd said cryptically. Ambassador Kren was exactly what Marcus expected. Tall, silver-haired, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a situation he couldn't dominate. His 2 junior diplomats flanked him like well-trained attack dogs, all professional smiles and predatory attention. The formal greetings were exquisitely painful. Protocol dictated every gesture, every word, every moment of eye contact. Marcus watched Alara perform the dance perfectly, her expression composed, her movements precise. This was the queen the galaxy expected, controlled, elegant, untouchable. But Marcus noticed small details others might miss. The slight angle of her ears suggesting readiness rather than submission. The way her breathing remained steady despite the pressure. The micro-expression that crossed her face when Kren made a deliberately condescending comment about the Alliance's youthful leadership. Not offense, but assessment. She was analyzing him, watching, learning, preparing. The formal reception concluded. The delegations would reconvene in 2 hours for the first negotiation session. Marcus made his way to the observation room adjacent to the negotiation chamber, where Adriana had said he could watch through one-way glass. He wasn't alone. Adriana was already there, along with Captain Blackwell and, surprisingly, Declan Thorne. Decided we all needed to witness history, Adriana said, or disaster. Either way seems important. Comforting, Marcus muttered. The negotiation chamber was designed for these encounters. A large circular table, equal seating for both parties, recording equipment positioned discreetly. Everything calibrated to suggest fairness, while actually giving neither side advantage. Alara entered first with her advisors. She wore formal diplomatic attire, the kind that cost more than Marcus made in a year. But something was different. Usually diplomatic dress emphasized authority through ornamentation. Alara's was simpler than protocol required, elegant but understated, making a statement without saying a word. Kren entered opposite, and the atmosphere immediately changed. He commanded space the way gravity commanded mass, simply by existing. His opening was textbook dominance. Queen Alara, the Kepler Union appreciates your willingness to finally address our concerns. We have been patient, but patience has limits. Marcus tensed. That phrasing was designed to put Alara on the defensive, to establish that Kepler had grievances, and the Alliance was the one needing to make amends. The traditional response would be to counter-assert, to establish equal grievance, to begin the careful dance of mutual accusation that would eventually reach compromise. Alara did something different. She leaned forward, her expression open and genuinely curious. Ambassador Kren, before we begin formal negotiations, I would like to understand something. You say you have been patient. What does patience look like from Kepler's perspective? What have you been waiting for that we have failed to provide? Kren paused. It was subtle, barely a hesitation, but Marcus saw it. The ambassador had not expected a direct question, had expected posturing, not curiosity. The Alliance has failed to acknowledge the disparity in our trade relationship, he said, recovering smoothly. Kepler provides essential resources but receives inadequate compensation. Inadequate by what measure? Alara asked. I am not challenging your assessment. I genuinely want to understand your calculation. What would adequate compensation look like? Another pause. Longer this time. Kren's junior diplomats glanced at each other, subtle confusion passing between them. This was not how these negotiations were supposed to begin. The current resource exchange rates undervalue Kepler's contributions by approximately 40%, Kren said, falling back on prepared talking points. We demand immediate adjustment to fair market values. 40%, Alara repeated. She pulled up data on her display. According to our economic analysis, adjusting rates by 40% would strain Alliance distribution networks to the breaking point. We would need to either raise prices throughout all member systems or reduce resource allocation to outer colonies. She looked up, meeting Kren's eyes. I am not saying no. I am asking, if we make that adjustment, what happens to the civilians who depend on current resource pricing? How do we protect them? Marcus watched Kren's expression shift. The ambassador was being asked to consider consequences beyond his immediate demands, was being treated as a problem-solving partner rather than an adversary. It was disorienting, disarming. That is the Alliance's concern, not ours, Kren said, but there was less certainty in his voice. It becomes everyone's concern if we destabilize the systems we are all trying to protect, Alara said calmly. Ambassador, I will be honest with you. The Alliance cannot meet your full demands as stated. The economics do not work. But I believe there is a solution that addresses your actual needs rather than your opening position. I cannot find that solution by myself. I need to understand what Kepler actually requires to thrive, not what sounds good in a negotiation. The chamber was silent. Even through the one-way glass, Marcus could feel the tension. This was the moment. Either Kren would adapt, would engage with this new approach, or he would double down on traditional tactics and force the negotiation into familiar territory. Kren studied Alara for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but genuine. Your Majesty, are you aware that you are negotiating in a manner that would have most diplomatic instructors weeping into their protocol manuals? I am aware, Alara said. I am also aware that the old approaches were not working for either of us. So I am trying something different. Different, Kren repeated. He leaned back in his chair, assessment written across his face. Very well. You want honesty? Here is honesty. Kepler does not actually need 40% adjustment. We need 20% in investment in infrastructure development. But we opened at 40 because that is how negotiations work. Everyone expects us to be cut down to half our demands, so we double what we actually need. One of Kren's junior diplomats made a strangled sound. Apparently, admitting your opening position was inflated was not standard Kepler diplomatic practice. But Alara didn't pounce on the admission, didn't use it as leverage. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. 20% in infrastructure investment. That is potentially workable. But I need to understand the infrastructure needs specifically. What are we building? What timeline? What is the actual gap between what Kepler has and what Kepler needs to be self-sufficient? And just like that, the negotiation transformed. Not adversarial positioning, but collaborative problem solving. Kren, perhaps recognizing that this approach might actually get him what he needed, engaged genuinely. They discussed numbers, timelines, resource allocation. Both sides acknowledged limitations honestly. Both sides looked for creative solutions. Marcus watched in amazement. It was working. The impossible, improbable, completely unorthodox approach was actually working. In the observation room, Adriana exhaled slowly. I cannot believe this is happening. Is it always like this? Declan asked. Negotiations, I mean? Never, Captain Blackwell said. I have observed 17 high-level negotiations in my career. They all follow the same pattern. This, she gestured at the chamber, this is unprecedented. The session continued for 2 hours. By the end, they had outlined a framework that gave Kepler significant resource rate improvements, plus alliance-funded infrastructure development, in exchange for long-term supply commitments and technological sharing. Not everything either side wanted, but more than traditional negotiation would have achieved. As the delegations prepared to adjourn, Kren stood. Your Majesty, before we conclude, I must tell you something. Alara looked up, wary. This was a test, Kren said. On the negotiation itself, those needs are real, but the approach, the pressure, the aggressive opening. The council asked me to assess whether you had become soft, ineffective. They were concerned about reports of behavioral changes, of you becoming too informal. He smiled. I am pleased to report that you are neither soft nor ineffective. You are something more dangerous, unpredictable. And unpredictability, when backed by genuine competence, is the most powerful negotiating position of all. Alara's ears angled back, surprise breaking through her composure. The council set this up? They were concerned. I told them concern was premature. After today, I will tell them concern is unnecessary. You have found a new approach that works. I suggest you continue using it. Kren inclined his head. It has been an honor negotiating with you, Your Majesty. I look forward to tomorrow's session. After the delegations left, Marcus made his way down from the observation room. He found Alara in a side chamber, alone, her composed expression finally cracking to show exhaustion and relief in something that might have been triumph. You did it, Marcus said. She turned and a smile broke across her face. We did it. Your impossible approach actually worked. Our impossible approach, he corrected. I just gave you the theory. You made it real. They stood together in the quiet chamber, two people who had gambled everything on honesty and somehow won. Alara moved closer, and for a moment Marcus thought she might hug him, might break protocol entirely. Instead, she took his hand, squeezed it once firmly. Thank you, she said quietly, for teaching me to be brave, for reminding me who I am, for being my friend when I needed one most. Thank you for trusting me despite all evidence that I'm making this up as I go. She laughed, and the sound filled the chamber with warmth. But their moment was interrupted. Adriana appeared at the doorway, her expression grave. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The next 48 hours moved like a storm. News of the negotiations spread faster than anyone expected. Galactic feeds picked up the story. Queen abandons traditional diplomacy for radical honesty. The reaction was immediate and divided. Traditionalists were outraged. Unprecedented breach of protocol, declared the Diplomatic Institute. Dangerous precedent, warned conservative council members. The Queen has lost her way, opined political analysts who'd never met Alara. But the public response was different, overwhelmingly different. Citizens across alliance systems flooded social channels with support. Finally, a leader who treats us like adults. This is what real leadership looks like. About time someone spoke truth instead of calculated nonsense. Approval ratings spiked. 67% jumped to 79% in 36 hours, the fastest climb in alliance polling history. But the council was not pleased. They called an emergency session, demanded Alara explain her reckless deviation from established procedures. The subtext was clear: fall in line or face consequences. Adriana delivered the news to Alara and Marcus in Cargo Bay 4, their impromptu war room. They are going to force a choice, she said grimly. Return to traditional methods, or they will initiate proceedings to question your fitness to lead. Marcus's fists clenched. They can't do that. She just pulled off the most successful negotiation in recent alliance history. They can, and they are considering it. Adriana looked at Alara. There is more. They know about Mr. Reed, about these meetings. They are demanding you and what they call inappropriate associations that undermine royal dignity. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alara's face went pale. They want me to stop seeing Marcus. They want you to choose, Adriana said, the crown or your friendship, traditional queenship or this new path. They cannot control you if you have allies who help you be authentic. So they are removing those allies. Marcus felt sick. This was his fault. He'd encouraged her to take risks, to be honest, and now she was losing everything because of it. I'll go, he said quietly. I'll transfer to another station. Request reassignment, whatever it takes to protect you. No. Alara's voice was firm, her ears angled forward, determination replacing fear. No, I will not do that. Alara, they want me to choose between being effective and being controlled, she continued, standing straight at her. They want me to believe I cannot be both authentic and powerful, that I must surrender one to keep the other. Her eyes blazed. I refuse. Adriana watched her carefully. Your Majesty, if you defy the council directly, they will proceed with the fitness review. The vote could go either way. You could lose the crown. Then I lose it being myself, Alara said. I have spent 3 weeks remembering who I am beneath the title. I will not forget again. Not for them, not for anyone. Marcus stared at her. You're willing to risk everything? I am willing to fight for what matters. She turned to Adriana. What would happen if I went public? If I addressed the alliance directly, before the council can frame the narrative? Adriana was quiet for a long moment. Then, it is risky, very risky, but given your current approval ratings and the public enthusiasm for your new approach, it might work. The council would have difficulty moving against you if the citizens are actively supporting you. Then that is what I will do. Alara's decision was made. I will speak to the alliance. I will tell them exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it means. I will not hide Marcus's role. I will not pretend this change came from nowhere. I will be honest. That's insane, Marcus said. You'll be putting a target on your back. On mine too. Yes, Alara agreed, but we will be honest, together. Is that not what you taught me? That honesty, even when dangerous, is better than comfortable lies? Marcus looked at her and saw the woman who had walked into his cargo bay 3 weeks ago, lonely and desperate for something real. He saw how far she'd come, how much courage it took to stand here, facing the loss of everything, and choose authenticity anyway. All right, he said, then let's do it right. No half measures. Full truth. Full truth, Alara agreed. They spent the next 12 hours preparing. Alara would address the alliance on all major channels. She would explain the negotiation strategy, credit Marcus explicitly, describe their friendship and what it meant. She would challenge the council to support authentic leadership or explain to citizens why they preferred calculated dishonesty. It was a gambit, a huge one, but it was honest. The address was scheduled for 1800 hours. Marcus watched from the same observation room where he'd witnessed the negotiation. This time, he wasn't alone. Adriana, Captain Blackwell, Declan Thorne, even some of the regular cargo bay workers had gathered. Word had spread. People wanted to see. Alara appeared on screens across the alliance. She wore formal attire, but simpler than usual. Her ears uncovered, expressive. Her posture regale, but not distant. Citizens of the Stellar Alliance, she began. I want to talk to you about honesty. For the next 20 minutes, Alara spoke. She described 15 years of calculated leadership, of every word measured, of the loneliness of never being able to simply be herself. She explained meeting Marcus, how an inappropriate comment had accidentally given her 5 minutes of genuine human connection. She detailed their friendship, how a cargo handler had taught her that honesty could be strength, how she'd applied that lesson to the Kepler negotiation, the success that followed. And then she addressed the council directly. I am told I must choose, she said, her voice steady and clear, between being the queen you want and being the person I am, between calculation and authenticity, between political safety and genuine leadership. Her ears angled forward, fierce and determined. I choose both. I choose to be a queen who is also a person, who speaks truth even when uncomfortable, who values friendship alongside duty, who believes citizens deserve leaders who are real, not just convenient. She paused, letting that sink in. The council says this undermines royal dignity. I say dignity without humanity is just empty performance. They say I am being manipulated by inappropriate associations. I say I am being supported by someone who sees me as a person, not a tool. They say I must return to old ways or face consequences. Alara looked directly at the camera, and Marcus could feel the intensity even through the screen. I will not return. This is who I am. This is who I choose to be. If the council believes the alliance is better served by a queen who pretends perfection and calculates every word, then they should say so publicly. Let the citizens decide whether they want authentic leadership or comfortable performance. She finished by thanking Marcus by name, describing his background, his integrity, his friendship. He risked nothing for me because he had already lost everything to honesty. And he taught me that sometimes losing everything is worth it if you keep yourself. I intend to keep myself, whatever the cost. The address ended. Silence fell over the observation room. Then Adriana's display lit up. Incoming data. She stared at it, eyes widening. The polling numbers are moving, fast. Up or down? Marcus asked, barely breathing. Up. Way up. 86% approval, highest in Alliance history. She looked at Alara on the screen, then at Marcus. The council just lost. They cannot move against her now, not with these numbers. Captain Blackwell smiled. The citizens have spoken. Declan laughed, relief and joy mixed together. She did it. You both did it. Marcus felt something unclench in his chest. They'd won. Against all odds, against all precedent, they'd actually won. But there was still more to come. 3 days later, the council held their session. They had no choice but to publicly support Alara's approach, praising her innovative leadership and authentic connection with citizens. The vote of no confidence never materialized. Instead, they proposed reforms to modernize diplomatic protocols. Kren, speaking for the Kepler Union, formally endorsed Alara's methods and suggested other systems adopt similar approaches. The galaxy has changed, he said. Our leadership must change with it. 1 week later, Marcus received a formal offer. Director of Communications Integrity, Office of the Queen. Salary that made his current pay look like pocket change. Official status, real authority to shape how Alliance leadership communicated. He stood in Cargo Bay 4 holding the offer on his display when Alara appeared. No disguise now, no need for one. Everyone knew. Everyone approved. So, she said, smiling, will you accept? Marcus looked around the cargo bay. The containers, the loading equipment, the simple work that had been his refuge. Then he looked at Alara, at the hope and happiness in her eyes. On one condition, he said. What condition? We still meet here, once a week, just to complain about logistics and eat terrible station food and remember why we started this. Her ears angled forward. That gesture he'd learned meant joy. Deal. They shook on it, and Marcus felt the warmth of her hand, the connection of genuine friendship. Thank you, Alara said quietly, for everything, for the inappropriate comment that started this, for teaching me to be brave, for standing with me when it mattered most. Thank you for trusting an exhausted cargo handler with bad judgment and opinions about efficiency. She laughed, and the sound echoed in the cargo bay that had seen everything begin. 3 months later, Liberty Station had become something of a pilgrimage site. People came to see at the cargo bay where the honest revolution started. Someone had put up a plaque. Here, Queen Alara Voss rediscovered humanity. Here, Marcus Reed taught a queen to complain. Here, honesty became strategy. Marcus found it embarrassing. Alara found it hilarious. The changes rippled outward. Other alliance leaders adopted authentic communication styles. Diplomatic protocols were revised to value genuine dialogue over traditional posturing. The Kepler Agreement became a template for new negotiations. And every week, without fail, Queen Alara Voss and Director Marcus Reed met in Cargo Bay 4. Sometimes they discussed policy. Sometimes they complained about station food. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Two friends who'd accidentally changed a galaxy by being honest with each other. On one particular afternoon, Marcus was teaching a workshop on tactical honesty to young Alliance officers. 20 eager faces, all taking notes, all trying to learn the secret. There is no secret, Marcus told them. Honesty isn't a tactic, it's a practice. It requires courage every single time. It requires trusting that people can handle truth even when truth is hard. A young officer raised her hand. But sir, what if being honest cost you everything? Marcus smiled, thinking of a night 2 years ago when he'd filed charges against his commander. Thinking of a moment 3 months ago when he'd casually insulted a queen and changed both their lives. Then you learn what you're actually made of, he said. And sometimes you find out that losing everything wasn't losing at all. It was finding what matters. After the workshop, he walked to Cargo Bay 4. Alara was already there, reviewing something on her display. She looked up and smiled. How was teaching? Terrifying. Those kids think I know what I'm doing. You do know what you are doing, Alara said. You taught me after all. I taught you to complain about vending machines and eat pancakes, hardly revolutionary. You taught me to be myself. That was revolutionary enough. A new cargo handler, fresh on station, walked past them. Young, nervous, clearly new to the job. He glanced at Alara, did a double take recognizing her, then quickly looked away, trying to be professional. Marcus watched him go, then looked at Alara. Remember when that was us? When we were both trying to figure out who we were? We still are, Alara said, but now we do it together. Together, Marcus agreed. They stood in the cargo bay as the station hummed around them, as the galaxy turned beyond the walls, as people everywhere learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply tell the truth. A queen and a cargo handler, a friendship born from exhaustion and inappropriate comments, a revolution sparked by honesty. Marcus looked at the containers around them, the same containers he'd been moving years ago, and smiled. You know what? He said. What? You really do have a nice ass. Alara laughed, the sound filling the cargo bay with warmth and joy and the promise that some things, the important things, never had to change. Say it again, she said, echoing their first meeting. Your Majesty, Marcus replied, grinning. You have consistently demonstrated excellence in all areas of leadership, including but not limited to your posterior aesthetics. That is the worst compliment I have ever received. And yet, it's honest. Yes, Alara agreed, still laughing. It is. They stood together as the universe spun on, two improbable friends who'd learned that honesty, even when dangerous, even when costly, even when absolutely inappropriate, was always worth it in the end. The cargo bay lights hummed overhead. The containers waited patiently for their next destination. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the Alliance, a small revolution continued to grow, one honest conversation at a time.